guys, it's Nurse Jet, Nursing the Truth. I hope everyone's having a great day today. So this is my third video today, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk for a few minutes. Just kind of recap about some things. I've been doing my videos probably for a couple of years now, and each day is a journey for me, and I learn daily, and I read, and I try to research as much as I can. So I just want to give a couple of shout outs today. I want to thank Rick from Philly, landing on my channel, and he said he's enjoyed watching the videos and learning. And Rick, I hope you have a new leash on life, or whatever you want to say. You know, this Southern girl sometimes gets tongue-tied, so just bear with me, my friend. Didn't have a lot of sleep last night. So, anyway, you know, have you ever just kind of read the scriptures and you're like, you know, I don't get this. There's some things that's missing. And it's all confused, and you're all over the place in the New Testament, and you're seeing things from the old into the new, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense. Even the books per se are not in chronological order. You see, some people say that the book of James is the very first book. Actually, it is the oldest written scriptures, I think, like in 49 or 50. So why wouldn't you want to put writings that were done first in the New Testament? Because if you start reading like things that were first, you would be scratching your head going, we have problems, Houston. So I'm not religious anymore. I don't believe this stuff any longer. What I do now, since I'm out of it, is I try to show people in history where things could be, where it can add up, and what is just simply not true. As I've told you, and as we've been on this journey, everybody knows that I've taught to you the Josephus and the Roman aristocrats had their hand in the writing of the New Testament. Scholars like Abelard Ruchelin, Ronald Seam, the pen name, I guess, of Roman Piso. Maybe he was a Piso. I don't know. But J. Gallus wrote a book with him called The Piso Christ. Get that. So, one instance. You have to read the Antiquities of the Jews. That is a must, friends. You have to read the Clementine Recognitions, the pseudo Clementines, the New Testament, some of the Gnostic scriptures, to try to be able to tell people. Because if you don't know what you're saying, then no one's going to understand you. So let's backtrack about John the Baptist and Jesus. This is a prime example. In the first century, there was so much fighting and just people wanting to be messiahs and wanted to be the king of Israel to fight against the Romans. It was not a quiet time, except for Tacitus says that it was quiet in the reign of Tiberius. So we have in Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus, Arius Piso writes that John the Baptist had a large following of people. And he was baptizing or what have you. And Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great, because Herod the Great died in 4 BCE. His son, Herod Antipas. He had 4 sons, and they each ruled different territories. So, he said that he had a large following, and that Herod was scared that he was going to lead an insurrection towards Rome. So that's a problem. Because in the scriptures it doesn't say anything about John the Baptist and an insurrection towards Rome. It just says that he was baptizing people across the Jordan for the remission of their sins. And even in Josephus's writings, it does not say that he was baptizing anyone for the remission of their sins. So that's a problem. Now, according to the New Testament Gospels, John was imprisoned and executed shortly after Jesus began his ministry. This ought to place his death around 29 or 30, per se, as we've been told by Christianity, which is the Roman Catholic Church, that went down through Protestantism, and then we're in this crap today. Now, but Arius Calpurnius Piso Josephus seems to place his death much later in like 35 or 36. And in the scriptures we're told that Herod Antipas had John the Baptist killed because he publicly criticized his marriage to his own brother's wife. And that Herodotus divorced her husband in order to marry Herod Antipas. Herod, who feared lest the great influence John had over the people might put it into his power and inclination to raise an insurrection rebellion. For they seem ready to do anything he should advise. That's a leader. That's a king. That's a Messiah. His father was Zechariah, the high priest. Why wouldn't John be next in line? You have a king, and then you have a high priest. So it can be confirmed that the Baptist died at about this time and not much earlier year portrayed in the Bible. King Aretas of Nabatea attacked and defeated Antipas in 36 in revenge for the slight to his daughter, whom Antipas divorced in order to marry Herodias. We can expect 1 to 2 year delay during the news reached Aretas and considered a diplomatic solution. Some of the Jews believe that Antipas' defeat was divine retribution for his execution of John. It said, now the Jews had an opinion that the destruction of this army was sent as a punishment upon Herod and a mark of God's displeasure to him. So this is what I'm saying. One more thing. Josephus says, I'm going to read it to you. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly as a punishment of what he did against John. That was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, he was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue both as to righteousness towards one another, piety towards God, and so to come to baptism, for that the washing with water would be acceptable to him if they made use of it. Not, listen to me, this is Aris Calpurnus Piso's words. He wrote this, and later on they redacted it to make the story to fit in with what the story of Jesus is. He says, for that the washing with water would be acceptable to him if they made use of it, not, N-O-T, listen to me, N-O-T, big words, not in order to the putting away or the remission of some sins only, but for the purification of the body, supposing still that the soul was thoroughly purified beforehand by righteousness. Isn't this funny? That he writes this. It's not for the remission of your sins. But in the scriptures, it says for the remission of your sins. You see where this is coming from. What are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the Bible that was written by men? Just like Aris Calpurnus Piso's a dirtbag? But you see how even though he can write the writings in 95 CE, 94 to 97, give or take a few years, and then after time goes by, as this was forming, this church, how then they could take the words out of something and twist it. Now, when many others came in crowds about him, for they were greatly moved or pleased by hearing his words, Herod, who feared lest the great influence John had over the people might put it into his power and inclination to raise a rebellion. You see, the frequent mentions of Herod in the New Testament tends to confuse the general reader. The dynasty that ruled Judea, then is Herodian, and a number of these became rulers. Herodian dynasty, a royal dynasty in Edomian and Edomite descent, ruling the kingdom, and later the Herodian tetrarchy as vassals of the Roman Empire. The Herodian dynasty began with Herod the Great, who assumed the throne of Judea with Roman support, bringing down the century-long Hasmonean kingdom. And Antipas ruled Perea, where Simon of Perea came after his father died in 4 BCE and was king. And also Antipas was ruler over Galilee. Epiphanius says James' pontificate lasted for 24 years after departure, And given the date for James's death, this would place his death at 38 BCE. So you see, in the Dead Sea Scrolls also, Herod Antipas wanted to kill John for insurrection, possibly. And he was fearful that the people were going to rise up. His father died. Simon of Perea came up. And that's just a hotbed, an inflammation to a wound that was already being dug in Judea. And if by any chance you thought Herod Antipas liked John and wanted to befriend him, you have another thing coming. The Dead Sea Scrolls tell a different side of what was going on. And in the scriptures where it talks about Herod Antipas and didn't know what was going on, he thought John had came back from the dead, and he was frightened because Jesus was doing this in the scriptures. He thought John had resurrected through Jesus. So let's go back a little bit. If, as a Christian, you're going to believe the story that John was baptizing past the Jordan, which that would be in Syria. That's Samaritan land. The 10 tribes. And Jesus comes down. John baptizes him in the 10 tribe area, the Samaritan land. And then John gets put into prison for this Herodias thing about the marriage. And Herodias says, I want John the Baptist's head. Deliver it to me on a platter. That's what I want. And Herod Antipas is like, really? Okay, I got to do what my daughter says. That's such a BS story if I've ever heard one. But the real truth of the matter was Herod Antipas was afraid of John's uprising possibility of a insurrection, a rebellion. It's kind of like zealotry to a degree. Because you had 4 different types of Essenes. You had a pacifistic, and then you had a nationalistic with daggers. And they were zealous for the law of Moses, or the law of Akhenaten. You decide. And so it gets put in prison. Why in the scriptures, if Jesus came down to the Jordan River and John baptizes this Jesus and says that I'm not worthy to unlatch your shoelaces, and then the heavens open up and it says, to my son who I'm pleased. Paraphrasing. But in actuality, true history Some truth, some lies in the Roman Empire. Piso writes, because you got to remember, Piso wasn't even born at the time of John the Baptist. He was just born a year later after John the Baptist died. So where do you get the information from? So John the Baptist dies in 36 per history. Josephus, Arius, Calpurnius, Piso says that he was baptizing people for the purification of their soul and to be righteous, not for the remission of your sins. The Bible and 2 Timothy is the inspired words of God. If you see in history that John the Baptist wasn't baptizing people for the remission of their sins, but then man says that he did, then he's a liar for God. And then when John the Baptist is in prison, he says to the disciples, "Are you sure that this is the one? Or shall we see if there's another?" He questions the leadership and messiahship of Jesus. He's worried. Is this the one? Another problem. If this was your cousin, as we've been told, then you should know if it's your cousin. Why question? Why wait for a little dove to fall on you, on your head, to let it be a signal from God that you are his son? So there's problems, people. Josephus writes, not for the remission of your sins. John did not die at 29 or 30. He died in 36, 35 or 36. Josephus wasn't born until 37. How would he have known all this? Who did he get the information from? And if you're in prison and you baptize the Son of God or God in the flesh, why would you be questioning the Almighty Creator if you are the one to come? Then you're a blasphemer. So guys, that's one example. And there are many others. But since John is at the beginning of all, then we should start from the beginning. Until next time, friends, Hotep and Ashe, and always do what God thought says. When you search for the truth and you find the truth, let the truth set you free, friends. It has me. Have a great evening, guys. Thank you very much. Bye.